Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're taking a look at the moon. Well, not just looking at it, I guess.
Right, more like looking at it, but also looking like through it, you know?
Okay, yeah, kind of like, is the moon, is it just what we see, or could it be like a map? And like, what would it even be a map of?
Right, exactly. So it's this idea that's been around for centuries, this idea that the surface of the moon, all those craters and shadows, they're not just random. They actually form a detailed map, a map of something much bigger, something we don't even see.
Like a hidden world, basically.
Right.
Kind of like occultism stuff, right? Secret knowledge and symbols and all that. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. The moon and its phases have always been connected with like mystery and a kind of mystical energy. And this lunar map idea, it adds a whole other layer to that. It takes it to another level.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we've got this Flat Earth podcast, The Lost History of the Flat Earth. They seem pretty into this whole moon map thing.
Right.
Then we got some NASA visuals, tour of the moon to see the official take on things.
Right. We want to see all sides of this.
Exactly, all sides. And there's this article about the Great Moon Hoax, I think it was, like a newspaper thing back in the 1800s. And then there's the work of this guy, John Sturgios.
Right. John Sturgios is key to a lot of this moon map stuff. He actually went and like meticulously mapped the moon's surface, I mean, really carefully. And what he found is like kind of spooky, actually. He says the patterns he found, they match up with the Earth's continents.
Hold on, wait. He's saying there's like a mini Earth up there on the moon.
Well, it's not exactly miniature, but yeah, his maps, they show specific things on the moon that look like lakes, deserts, mountain ranges here on Earth. He even says he's found something like the Grand Canyon up there.
Whoa, seriously? No
Uh-huh.
way. So this Flat Earth podcast, did they buy into this?
Oh, they go even further. They're saying Sturgio's map, it's not just showing us our world, but a much bigger one, a landmass we don't even know about. Like, it's hidden.
Okay, but if the moon is a map of this, like, greater Earth, where is this missing landmass? How come we've never seen it?
Right, that's the big question, right? The podcast, they give a couple of ideas. One idea is maybe it was above water at some point, but then it got submerged, like gone, lost in some big event like a flood or something.
And they keep talking about this mud flood thing. It's like a big reset button got hit in the 1800s, covered everything in mud.
Yeah, that's a big part of their theory. They've got all this photographic evidence from that time, like pictures of cities completely empty, covered in mud. But here's the weird part. In these cities, there's all this incredibly advanced architecture, way ahead of what they should have had back then.
It's like they inherited these buildings, this technology they didn't even understand, a civilization out of sync, almost.
Exactly. And the podcast, they say this mud flood, that's what reshaped everything, sunk that hidden landmass and wiped out the knowledge of like a super advanced civilization that was here before.
That's pretty dark. But it kind of makes sense when you think about all those orphan trains and stuff back then. Thousands of kids just like separated from their families.
Right. Like maybe there was some big depopulation event. Could tie in with the whole reset thing.
Okay, so we've got this possible lost continent, a cataclysmic event, a moon that might be a map to all of it. But I mean, how do you even wrap your head around the moon being a map? What are we even seeing when we look at it?
Well, get ready for this because the Flat Earth podcast, they don't even think the moon is what we think it is. They say it's not a solid rock reflecting sunlight, but a plasma phenomenon.
Hold up, a plasma moon. Isn't plasma like what they use in TVs?
Yeah, but plasma is also a state of matter, like superheated gas with electrons stripped away. There's this professor, R. Foster, back in the 60s. He said the moon's properties, like the way its light is, the fact that there's like no crater under the lunar lander, it all points to it being this luminous plasma, not rock.
So like a big glowing ball of plasma hanging up there. But then how does it have an image of Earth on it?
This is where they start getting into some deep occultism stuff. They talk about silver, how it's always been associated with the moon and alchemy, and how it was used in early photography.
Are they saying it's like some kind of space photograph? Like someone took a picture of Earth and put it on this plasma moon?
Yeah, something like that. They think it's kind of like an X-ray, burning an image of Earth onto this plasma canvas. Maybe that's why it shows a landmass we can't see anymore. It's a snapshot of the world as it used to be.
Okay, my brain is officially melting. A plasma moon acting like a giant X-ray of a lost world. Like a sci-fi movie or something. But then we also have that NASA video, Tour of the Moon. They're showing the moon as this solid, rocky body, billions of years old, shaped by asteroid impacts.
Right. Their visuals are incredible. Super high definition, close-ups of all these craters and stuff. They really make you think about how much the moon has been through.
They show this one crater, the Oriental Basin. It's huge. I mean, it's like the distance from New York to Cincinnati. Imagine the power of something that could create that.
Yeah, it really is incredible to think about. But what's interesting is even NASA admits there's still so much we don't know about the moon. Like there's this crater, Shackleton, it's always in shadow. They're just now starting to understand what's in there with new technology.
So we've got these two completely different views of the moon. One says it's this plasma map of a lost world. The other says it's just a big rock with a long history. I don't know what to believe.
I think that's the point, isn't it? To consider both sides, weigh the evidence, and maybe, just maybe, find some truth in between.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I love about these deep dives. It's about challenging what we think we know and opening our minds to new possibilities. Now let's get into this swastika and vortex stuff. I'm really curious about that.
Before we do that, we should probably talk about this whole Great Moon hoax thing. You know, the bat people on the moon thing?
Oh yeah, that was a crazy story.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just a hoax, right?
Yeah.
What does that have to do with all this?
Well, it might seem like a joke, but I think it actually tells us something important. People back then, they were so ready to believe in something extraordinary, even if it wasn't true. It's a good reminder that we should always be a little bit skeptical, especially when it comes to these big claims about hidden worlds and ancient tech.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, but we got to stay grounded, look at the evidence, and think for ourselves.
Exactly. And that's what we'll try to do as we keep exploring this whole moon thing.
Yeah.
So, you ready to talk about the swastika and the vortex?
Let's do it. The podcast makes it sound like this is some serious esoteric symbolism stuff. Connecting the swastika, which is this ancient symbol found all over the world, to a vortex at the North Pole, like a point where all this energy comes from.
Right. And they say the swastika in its original form, before it got, messed up, it represented this vortex. They even compare it to the black sun idea in occultism. And this vortex, they say, that's what creates the radiation that forms the plasma moon.
Well, hold on. They're saying there's a connection between the Earth's core, this vortex, and the moon itself.
That's what they're claiming. And to understand it better, we got to talk about this other concept they bring up. Ether. They describe it like a bridge between energy and matter, like the stuff that connects everything.
Wait, ether? Isn't that like an old science idea? Like before Einstein?
Yeah, most people think that. But in some esoteric traditions, ether is a real force, this life-giving energy that's all around us. And the podcast, they say this ancient civilization, they harness this ether to create a global power grid.
Wait, a global power grid? Like back then? Are you saying they had technology that was like way beyond what we have now?
That's exactly what they're saying. And they say we can still see remnants of it, canals, aqueducts, these really ornate buildings designed to manipulate sound. They say it all worked together to harness this ether energy.
So all those beautiful buildings we see, maybe they weren't just for looks, maybe they were part of some kind of super advanced tech that we've lost?
Right. And the podcast, they even talk about this guy, John Paxton. He was a gardener, but he designed all these crazy structures like the Crystal Palace. They say he was tapping into this ancient knowledge somehow.
A gardener designing those things?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. And they tie this into the suppression of something called hydropathy. It's like a water-based healing practice. But they say it also involved harnessing sound and electricity in water. They say people in power suppressed this knowledge because it was too powerful, too threatening.
So we've got a hidden history, lost tech, a cover-up. My mind is blown.
I know, right? It's a lot to take in. But remember, these are just theories, interpretations of things. But they make you look at the world differently, that's for sure.
That's the best part of these deep dives, isn't it? It's not about believing everything, but about opening our minds to new ways of seeing things.
Totally agree. And speaking of new ways of seeing things, we got to get into this alchemy connection to all this. It seems like a big part of what the podcast is talking about.
Alchemy. Okay, now we're really going down the rabbit hole. But I'm game. What's the deal with alchemy in this old tech?
Well, in alchemy, gold and mercury, they're like the key players. Gold is like perfection, the end goal. Mercury is like the transformer, what gets you to gold.
So they're saying maybe these alchemists, they weren't just messing around with chemicals. Maybe they were working with real energy, figuring out how to harness the power of these metals.
Exactly. And the podcast, they say maybe this ancient civilization, they were like the alchemists of energy. They built these structures to transform energy, just like alchemists transformed metals.
So like those cathedrals and towers, they weren't just buildings. They were giant alchemical vessels.
Just the idea. They even bring up this legend of Saint Christopher, the guy who carries the Christ child across the river. They say it's a symbol of this alchemy process.
Wait, St. Christopher? What does he have to do with alchemy?
They say Saint Christopher, he's like the Mercury, the transformer.
Right.
And the Christ child, he's like the gold, the pure potential, the river. That's like the flow of energy. So Saint Christopher carrying the Christ child, it's like Mercury elevating gold to its full power.
Okay, I kind of get it now. So these alchemists, they knew how to use these metals, these energies to transform things, even on a spiritual level. And the podcast is saying this old civilization, they took that knowledge and scaled it up, building these structures that could manipulate energy on a massive scale.
Exactly. And to prove their point, they talk about all this griffin and lion symbolism in architecture. These mythical creatures, they represent this blending of the earthly and the heavenly, like in the alchemical process.
And they're saying these symbols, their true meaning has been hidden from us, just like what happened with the swastika.
Right. They're saying someone, somewhere, doesn't want us to know about this ancient knowledge and how it all worked.
So we're talking about a world where science, spirituality, and symbolism were all connected, where alchemists were like the original engineers, and buildings were designed to work with the forces of nature in ways we can't even imagine.
That's exactly the picture they're painting. And it's a pretty mind-blowing one. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about history, technology, even reality itself.
I'm telling you, these deep dives are like a workout for my brain.
I know, right? We've covered a lot of ground already. Mud floods, orphan trains, plasma moons, alchemy, and this is just the beginning.
I know. My brain is already fried. I'm ready for a break, but I can't wait to hear more.
Well, then stick around, because in part 2, we're going even deeper into this whole moon as a map thing. We're going to explore more of the evidence, the theories, and what it all might mean. It's going to be wild. All right, so before we move on, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, the idea that the moon's image, it might not be just one picture, but like a combination of at least 2.
Yeah, that was interesting. It could explain some of those weird things you see on the moon.
Right, like those craters that have rays coming out of them, like spokes on a wheel. The podcast, they say those aren't really impact craters, or like glimpses of something called the firmament.
The firmament, right. Like a dome, a solid sky that covers the Earth.
Exactly. So they're saying, since the Earth is flat, right, these rays on the moon, they're not from impacts. They're actually showing us the structure of the firmament, like from the inside.
So it's like looking up at a dome and seeing the supports holding it up. I kind of get it now.
Right. It's like a layered photograph. One layer is this hidden landmass. The other layer is the firmament itself. And they say these images, they were captured like a snapshot way back when this landmass was still above water.
So we're back to this idea of a world that's lost, gone underwater maybe.
Right.
And the moon, it's like a time capsule showing us what used to be, including this firmament thing.
Right. It's pretty wild when you think about it. Ancient ideas mixed with like modern theories about the moon.
It makes you wonder if there's a whole lot more to the universe than we realize. But how does this whole composite image thing explain those similarities between the moon and the Earth's continents, like the Grand Canyon and all that?
That's a good question. Honestly, the podcast doesn't really address that. They focus more on like the parts that fit their narrative,
Yeah.
The hidden world, the dome sky.
So they're kind of picking and choosing what evidence they want to use.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And that's something to keep in mind with any theory, especially the ones that go against like what most people think. We can't just focus on what we want to believe. We got to look at everything.
Right. That's why it's good to have that NASA video tour of the moon, too. They explain those craters as being from billions of years of impacts, right?
Right. And the podcast, they basically say mainstream science, it's all part of a big conspiracy to hide the truth. They say NASA and all those organizations, they're trying to keep us from seeing how things really are.
Whoa. Okay, so now we're getting into some serious conspiracy theories. We got to be careful with this stuff.
Definitely. It's good to be open-minded, but we got to be smart about it, too. Not everything you hear is true, even if it sounds exciting or makes you feel like you have some secret knowledge.
Okay, so where are we now? We've talked about this mud flood, a plasma moon, a composite image, and now conspiracies.
Whoa.
I need a minute to process all this.
Yeah, it's a lot. The main thing to remember is think for yourself. Don't believe everything you hear, whether it's from scientists or from, these alternative sources.
Right. Question everything, look for proof, and make up your own mind. That's good advice for life in general, I think.
Totally. There's so much information out there these days, it's easy to get lost in it. We got to be critical thinkers, like you said.
Exactly. And that's what these deep dives are all about, exploring different ideas, challenging what we think we know, and learning to think for ourselves.
I totally agree. And speaking of exploring, there's one more thing I think we should look at. The moon's symbolism in like
Yeah.
occultism and all that.
Oh, yeah, good point. The moon has always had a lot of meaning in those traditions, right? Like, it's connected to, like, feminine energy, hidden things, change.
Exactly. And I think that's why this whole idea of the moon as a map, especially to this hidden world, it resonates with people who are into those kinds of things.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What's the connection between the moon and all that symbolism?
Well, one of the big things is the moon represents like the subconscious mind, dreams, intuition. It's like the opposite of the sun, which is all about logic and the conscious mind.
So the moon is like the shadow side, the things we don't see or understand.
Exactly. And that fits with this whole hidden world idea, right? It's like a place beyond our normal perception, maybe even beyond the physical world.
It's like the moon, just by its nature, makes us think about hidden things, knowledge that's just out of reach.
Right. And then there's the whole thing with the moon's cycles. Waxing and waning, new moon to full moon, they've always been connected to death and rebirth, to change, to light and darkness.
So it's like the moon is a symbol of transformation, of things appearing and disappearing.
Exactly. And that makes you think about this lost world again, right? Maybe it existed, then it was gone, like those cycles of the moon.
That's a powerful idea. It makes me think about alchemy, too, with its focus on transforming things. Is there a connection between the moon and alchemy?
Definitely. In alchemy, the moon is associated with silver, remember? And silver, it's a symbol of purity, receptivity, the feminine. It's often paired with gold, which is the masculine. And together they create this dynamic force that drives the alchemical process.
So the moon, with its silver energy, it's like a vessel, something that can be transformed, maybe even a catalyst for change.
That's a great way to put it. And this alchemy connection, it just adds another layer to the moon's symbolism. It shows us that the moon isn't just a thing up in the sky. It's this powerful symbol with deep meaning, a gateway to hidden knowledge.
It's like we're seeing the moon with new eyes now, not just as a moon, but as a symbol, a map, maybe even a key to understanding the universe in a whole new way.
Exactly. And that's what I love about these deep dives. It's not about getting answers. It's about expanding our minds, seeing things differently, and realizing that the world is much more amazing and mysterious than we ever thought.
That's a perfect way to put it. But we're not done yet. There's still more to this story, more threads to unravel. Join us for part 3, where we'll go even deeper into the heart of this mystery. The moon as a map to a hidden world. Wow, we've really been through a lot, haven't we? Mud floods, plasma moons, alchemy, even conspiracy. It's like our brains got a serious workout.
I know, right? It's a lot to take in, all these different ideas about the moon and what it might represent, but I think that's what makes this so fascinating.
Yeah, it's really made me think about the moon in a whole new way. Like, it's not just this thing up in the sky anymore. It's a symbol, a mystery, maybe even a key to something bigger.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's worth circling back to the core idea here, this concept of the moon as a map, potentially a map to a whole hidden world.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Is there something more out there, something beyond what we know? And is the moon trying to tell us about it?
Right. And I think a lot of this comes back to John Sturgio's and his work. His maps, his meticulous study of the moon's surface, that's kind of the foundation for a lot of these more elaborate theories.
Yeah, his claim that the moon's features, the craters and all that, actually reflect the Earth's continents, that's pretty wild.
It is. It gives this whole idea a kind of visual grounding, It makes you think, maybe the moon is more than just a rock. Maybe it's a reflection, a map, maybe even a portal to something else.
And then the Flat Earth podcast, they really took that idea and ran with it, using it to support their whole narrative about a greater Earth hidden from view.
Right, and they even brought in this whole composite image theory, suggesting that the moon's image is actually a blend of different pictures, including one of this hidden landmass and another of the firmament.
Right, that dome-shaped sky they talk about.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to create a new cosmology, a new way of understanding the universe that combines ancient ideas with these more modern observations.
It's a really interesting approach, and I think it appeals to people who are looking for deeper meaning, a bigger picture. But we have to remember that a lot of this is based on interpretation. It's about seeing patterns and symbols and assigning meaning to them.
So how do we know what's real and what's just, like, our imagination running wild? It's easy to get carried away with all of these ideas, especially when they're so exciting and mysterious.
That's true, and I think the key is to approach it all with a balance of open-mindedness and critical thinking. We should be open to new ideas, but we also need to question things, look for evidence, and be honest with ourselves about what we're seeing.
It's like finding that sweet spot between being skeptical and being open to possibilities. We don't want to dismiss everything outright, but we also don't want to just believe everything we hear.
Exactly. It's about being curious, exploring different perspectives, and allowing ourselves to be amazed by the universe, but also being grounded and discerning in our thinking.
That's a great way to put it. It's not about finding all the answers. It's about embracing the mystery, the wonder, and the possibility that there's so much more out there than we can even imagine.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And that's what this whole deep dive has been about, really. Exploring the unknown, questioning what we think we know, and opening ourselves to new ways of seeing the world.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll actually unlock the secrets of this celestial map and find out if there really is a hidden world out there waiting to be discovered. Until then, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the mysteries of the universe. It's a pretty amazing place.
It really is. And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive into the moon as a map. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.